Hi, everybody. My name is Natalie Yeadon. I'm one of the co-owners and managing directors with Impetus Digital. For those of you who don't know what Impetus Digital does, we've actually built some of the best-in-class asynchronous and synchronous virtual communication and collaboration tools for life science companies. Since COVID-19 and for the last 12 years, we've helped companies virtualize their in-person meetings, be it advisory boards, working groups, investigator meetings, medical education. And since then, a lot of things around clinical trials, training of sales reps, MSLs, et cetera. But more importantly, what we really wanted to get across in these podcasts that we've developed is we really believe that with everything that starts, it begins with a courageous conversation. And we think that from these conversations with the provocateurs, with the leading edge thinkers, with the leaders in the healthcare space, that we can all work to collectively and positively disrupt healthcare. So I'm super thrilled to have one of these thinkers, one of these courageous thinkers at the table with us today. Super excited to have Kimberly Tableman at our call today. She's a very accomplished, transformational business and technology executive. She's got a proven track record in developing business strategies and of also utilizing the latest technologies to basically transform the businesses that she started. Her primary focus for the last 13 years has been with the pharmaceutical industry. So this is great, right up our alley with the group that we work with, and specifically with clinical development. She has spoken at many different industry events, and she's written a number of different kinds of white papers related to understanding and aligning business strategy, transformation, and how to use digital solutions, data, and analytics. So all kinds of things that we're going to want to get our hands into today. She also has a degree in information and knowledge strategy from Columbia University and is an active member of the Society of Information Management. She's currently the CIO and the interim COO at Medicine X. So what does that mean and stand for? As well as the CEO and co-founder at Rabble Health. So just in case you didn't think you were busy enough, you should take a look at Kimberly's schedule. So welcome, Kimberly, to the show. So happy to have you.
Thank you so much. Happy to be here.
That's great. So what a whirlwind background, career trajectory. I'm sure you get asked this all the time, but how did you land where you landed today? Love to know about that spin over the last several years.
Yeah, so I started my career in technology, and at the time that I was looking to graduate, which was around 2000, I was actually going into physical therapy. So I was always very, healthcare focused at that time. But I decided, I kind of looked around, and as I was trying to land on my major, I thought, you know what, technology is going to be relevant no matter what field I end up going into. And so that was my undergraduate degree in management information systems. And then I went on to do consulting with Capgemini Ernst & Young for a number of years. And I always joke that's where I got my real education. Because I went around to companies all over the United States. I did a stint at Sprint North Supply in Kansas. I worked for Cigna in Bloomfield, Connecticut, Cigna Behavioral Health in Eden Prairie. And then I also did a joint venture between the state of Hawaii and the state of Arizona for a Medicaid claims system implementation. So it was a lot of fun, and they were large scale IT implementations. So that was, as I said, you just got different perspectives on how people manage those projects, different tools, different personalities. And then fast forward, I decided that I wanted to get married and have children at a certain point. So that was in my later 20s. And at the time I was living in Connecticut. So I did a brief stint actually at ESPN, still technology focused. But ultimately landed at Pfizer, where I spent almost 10 years. And I always say, I think everyone has the story of where they grew up, and I grew up at Pfizer from a professional perspective. So I went from manager to director there. I built wonderful relationships that I still have today. And I would say that was really where I started to identify that there were so many opportunities within drug development from a transformative perspective. And in fact, I started kind of that transformative discussion there around quality management systems and moving from a reactive to a proactive position, and also leveraging data more holistically and how could we do that more effectively. And I was intimately involved at Pfizer with what's called the Accenture Life Sciences Cloud at the time. That's what it was called. I think it's called Intuit now. But it was all about bringing clinical trial data together and leveraging it more effectively within the business. So then fast forward, after that work at Pfizer, I then took a senior director position at GSK. And both of the roles I was in at GSK were really from a transformative perspective. One had to do with data and analytics and kind of the clinical data domain. And then I quickly moved into the head of digital clinical trials role, which was all about, again, charting a path forward to transform drug development at GSK.
Super exciting. Honestly, there are so many nuggets there, and I can't wait to dig in with you today on that, especially around digital clinical trials. So amazingly timely, as you can obviously know. But let's actually just focus a little bit on the companies that you've created and established in the last few years. So starting off with Medicine X. First of all, why the name Medicine X? And maybe you can speak to the audience about what this company is and what does it do?
Yeah, so Medicine X was created by and founded by Dr. Kim Chilman Blair. So we call ourselves K squared when I joined the team in March of this year. But I'm really proud of the work in the company that Kim has put together, and I was excited to join. So obviously made a big leap from GSK, which has over 100,000 employees, to Medicine X, which has about 22. And I did it actually the week that the whole country shut down for coronavirus. So it's been a very interesting year. But Kim had this idea that people, it started early on with children, but she quickly moved to adults, not understanding their, conditions. And she had a friend who at the time had cancer. He had all the resources available to him in the world. And he called her and said, I need you to come to MD Anderson because I just can't understand a single thing that these people are saying to me. And that's really where Medicine X was born, in the sense that Kim recognized a need that people truly need to understand these conditions and disease states that afflict them. And so she started doing storytelling and using artists from Marvel and Netflix and really across the globe. We have graphic artists that we work with, and putting together stories for all different types of conditions. So obviously cancer is one. We have stories around eczema. We have things around really rare conditions like cyclical vomiting syndrome. And again, the idea is to empower people and empower patients with knowledge and information so that they can have a much more robust conversation with their caregivers.
Yeah, I love it. And I've gone in the site and I find it fascinating. And I just kind of want to, chew on this a little bit because there's so many little interesting nuances. So first of all, this concept of storytelling. Why is this such an important concept for the way humans learn? Especially when you're thinking about cognition and the reptilian versus the cerebral way that we learn, and automaticity in the different parts of our nervous system. What is so unique and interesting about storytelling?
Well, I think that for any of us or all of us, the visual component of being able to see. So in one of our stories, there's the white blood cell and the red blood cell, and they're actually characters. And so you can see them as they interact with each other and what's actually happening. So that is a very, very different experience than having someone try to verbally explain to you what's going on. Another one that I love is the migraine explained story. where it talks about, and you can visualize kind of what's happening with the neurons and this electrical storm that's happening in your mind, but you actually visually can see it. So I think that people can latch onto those concepts much easier in kind of that visual form versus someone trying to explain that to them.
Yeah, and I feel that it works very nicely. One of the most leading edge books that I thought was life shifting for me was a book by Daniel Kahneman called Thinking Slow and Fast. So it really leverages the basics around heuristics and the core tenets and the principles and the kind of neural networks we've already built and gets them to relate to that. So storytelling really very much latches on to what is already organically embedded with us in terms of our own belief systems. Now, tell us a little bit about why you decided to leverage the comic book concept as opposed to, for example, traditional videos. We know that, TikTok and YouTube and, these quick snippets are taking off and people love video. So why is it that it was decided, either through market research or just through hearing people's responses, did you find the comic book concept much more effective in this regard than creating video?
Yeah, well, really, the concept comes from this idea that we base each story on an actual patient. So these are real patients with the condition, and then it's going through, in a way, a day in the life of that specific patient, and we just bring them together in kind of the cartoonish, way, if you will. But in addition to that, the reason for the story and being able to click through the story is that we wanted people also to be able to go back and have it as a reference, so that you could go back to the story anytime. You can click backwards, you can click forwards. If there's one specific area that you're trying to understand a little bit, further, then you can actually go to that specific page. And that's just something that you can't necessarily do from a video perspective. So that's really why we took that approach. We have recently started doing animated videos as well, though, and that's been a lot of fun too.
It'll be really neat to see when the technology gets so good that people can annotate videos and do time placements and tag this, and we'll get there. We're just not there yet. I'm sure there's somebody already working on it. I just don't know what it is yet, but that would be really, really cool. But I love the comic strip piece, and I'm actually just curious if some of the thinking was sort of downscaling the immensity of the disease or the condition, not dumbing it down, but making it more retrievable or livable or friendlier by making it sort of comic bookish. Was that sort of the thinking behind it as well?
Yeah, and Kim says that all the time as well. It's not dumbing it down, but it's simplifying it in a way that people can really grab onto it and really, understand. And that's the whole basis behind, Medicine X, is that we want people to truly be able to understand their condition. So you're absolutely correct. It's kind of distilling it into those critical pieces of the condition itself, rather than just kind of a deluge of information that's coming at you.
Some of the things that we've been hearing a lot recently, especially and we're going to get into this today, is around digital clinical trials and biomarkers and this idea of the digital divide. You probably do need to have a phone or a computer to be able to access Medicine X, but at the same time, it's not very tech heavy. So it makes it feel like it's a little bit more accessible. And as we've just come out of a US presidential election and hearing about, a large percentage of the population are not college educated, and, there's a certain scale of understanding and being able to make sure that you're accessing these individuals with the right tools, with the right language. Do you feel that Medicine X is positioned appropriately to provide this knowledge and this information to a wider catchment of consumers and patients?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that that Medicine X did that is really smart is we can host on really any platform. So we have a proprietary tool that builds the story. And when I say build the story, that's really bringing together the graphic art and the script writing into the actual story. And then that's housed within kind of this proprietary tool. But then we have, a couple lines of code where you can copy and paste that really into any medium. So if you wanted to host that on your own website, you can do that. We have a way to, work with organizations. We were recently talking to actually Kroger Health, which is super interesting because they're trying to get people to think about eating healthier when they come into the stores. And so there was an idea there of could they leverage the same content, so the story, right, but have it in a way where it's kind of clicking through on a video monitor or something like that. So it's not a video, it's still the story, but that they could use it on that platform. So I think that that's one of the benefits of being Medicine X is that we can display our information in a lot of different formats, and we are able to do that successfully.
I really love that too, because people have their own social media outlets of choice, Instagram or Facebook.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have these like clickable bites, you can actually become viral. And it's such an interesting advantage potentially for Medicine X that your items can start disseminating through the use of its own members.
Exactly.
And it's such an interesting mechanism to do that. Now, I just want to ask you as well too about the decision to use graphic artists and other sorts of artists around writing, consultants, etc. Why did you decide to go with artists instead of going with the typical vendor agency relationship, working with Medicine X? It's your own internal people. Why was that decided? What is it doing to enhance the program?
Well, we give a lot of direction. So all of our stories are actually written by medical doctors. So Kim is a doctor herself, but we also have several other doctors on staff. And Jen is actually our medical director, and she oversees all of the projects. And a big part of what makes us successful is that we do have medical doctors that are reviewing and creating this content. So if you think about needing to take a complex medical condition and break it down into a simplified story that people can understand, that is not easy to do. So most of that, I would say all of it actually, is directed by our team. So that's not something that we felt like we could readily partner with a digital agency on. A lot of times a digital agency will want to have some creative control, and we really like to kind of control the product from that perspective.
Yeah, no, totally makes sense. And one of the things I think is interesting, Kimberly, is what you could eventually do with those graphic artists and writers. They could eventually be the patients and the people with their own stories.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious about the opportunity to merge the two. So not just having physicians reciting the stories, but leveraging these graphic artists and writers from their own perspective and sharing the patient story. Is that something that is being planned in the future?
Yeah, and as I said, every story is based on a real patient. So it's kind of that mashup, of a real patient story and then the distilled medical content with our medical writers. And I think that's really, the secret to Medicine X's success.
And I love it. It is such a cool idea, and it's very visually appealing. How do people find your site? So obviously, you want to get patients to come in here and understand. You want physicians to, so they can share it with, and this is actually how the audience grows. How do people find Medicine X?
Yeah, so we use a lot of digital marketing tools, and that is actually another advantage to partnering with Medicine X for life sciences companies. A lot of the life sciences companies have not yet fully grasped onto things like Google Analytics and kind of more of those digital marketing tools that are available, and so that's really the approach that we use, and we do provide that third party, from arm's distance. So again, a life science company can sponsor content, but we manage the relationship with the patients, which is really how we see ourselves. So we see ourselves as a patient relationship company and not a digital marketing agency per se.
Beautiful. Awesome. So I have all kinds of questions about Medicine X, but maybe we can just flip over because you're also simultaneously running another company, which is similar to Medicine X, but much more focused in oncology. And it's
Mhm.
called Rabble Health. Can you tell us a little bit about what this does and is? How is it related to Medicine X and why a separate company?
Yeah. So when I decided to leave GSK, a lot of my decision was because I decided that the disruption that needed to happen in our space was likely to come from the outside. I had spent 3 years internally building out, kind of a strategic roadmap for digital transformation in the drug development space. And there was still a lot of, I would say, cultural barriers to overcome internally. So when I made that decision, I started thinking about what is the first thing that needs to change. So there's many opportunities in drug development, but I was like, what's the first thing? So for me, it was really access to clinical trials. I feel like clinical trial information should be accessible to all people. I think it should be an option. Doesn't mean everyone's going to exercise it. Doesn't mean everyone wants to, but they should at least be aware of what's available from an experimental medicine perspective, particularly in oncology. So and I'll give an example. So in the oncology space, there's 700 approved therapies today. So 700 essentially drugs that are on the market. There's another 1,000 that are in development, and most of those are precision medicine focused, which means they need to find specific people with specific genetic biomarkers. And so it was really clear to me that that is not easy to suss through if you've just recently been diagnosed with cancer. And the only way to start to figure it out today is Google and PubMed. So Aubrey and I, my co-founder, wanted to solve that problem. So rather than creating content, so Medicine X is all about creating content and sharing the patient journey that way. We actually created a specific channel. So it's a digital marketing channel, essentially. It's a platform where patients are actually on the platform. And our passion is to serve the patient first. And to explain just a little bit about what that looks like. So if you think about being recently diagnosed with cancer, you are in what we call the shock and awe phase, right? You're completely shocked and you don't know what to do. You're going through a lot of emotions. And so the first thing that we want to do is provide a warm meal. So that's going to be one of the utilities that Rabble provides. And again, because we're not building it with a business mindset from that perspective, we're building it with what is going to serve the patient most effectively. And in that, we hope to build a community of rabble rousers that help us transform healthcare together.
Neat, love it. So many cool things. So we talked about Medicine X, which is really a storytelling, content generating. It's almost like an inbound marketing opportunity for people to come in and consume. And then we're really talking about now that people are in, if they're specifically oncology types or people or caregivers or people with conditions in the oncologic space, you've created a platform called Rebel Health where they can then live and breathe and merge and meld with the other people in the ecosystem. So I'm going to want to kind of dissect that pathway or that patient journey, if you will, as we have this conversation. So when we're actually talking about the stories, I noticed that you're kind of leading people through with the Medicine X through the various conditions. So tell me about if I was a life science company, pharmaceutical, biotech, company that has a very specific product, let's just say we'll go down the oncology space. So a new product, it has a biomarker, it's a biomarker for multiple therapeutic spaces, and we're looking for specific patients, I don't know, in multiple therapeutic areas. How do they approach you? And what is it that you're going to serve up to them as being your business model, or what the partnership looks like?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And in both cases, I'll talk to Medicine X first and then I'll talk about Rabble. But in both cases, we are very focused on a specific call to action. So I'll use the example from Medicine X. Kim was actually working on one of her stories for prostate cancer. And the call to action within the story itself was get tested, right? Go out and get tested. And it was just it's very serendipitous, but her father said, hey Kim, what are you working on these days? And she said, oh, I'm working on this storytelling for prostate cancer. And the call to action was to get tested, and her father went and got tested and actually did have cancer. And so
Wow.
yeah, which is it's crazy. They actually wrote an article about it in Australia. I can send it to you after. But
Wow.
um, so, and that's really, when you think about it from a storytelling perspective, again, you want people to, in some cases, take, specific action that will help them manage their condition more effectively. In the Rabble health space, again, very similarly. So I'll give an example. I won't say the company, but we're currently talking to a large company that has a therapy for individuals with ALL that have relapsed, but they can only help them with that specific therapy if that individual has relapsed. And so they have a call to action around wanting people to get MRD testing. And so again, our platform would facilitate the ability to interact with those patients and basically just say, hey, be sure to go and get your MRD testing. And then kind of providing that disease state awareness, clinical trial awareness. And we kind of think of them as educational type campaigns. And the other thing that I'll say about Rabble, outside of kind of this idea of call to action, is that the reason that Aubrey and I started Rabble is because internally, I'm not sure that one specific pharma company has the motivation to build a platform that serves actually all pharma companies. Because the reality is, if you have, and I'll use a different example, but breast cancer, and you need a PIK1/3CA inhibitor type drug, there's multiple companies that have that type of therapy available. And so we wanted to create a place where all of that information can be provided to people that need it, because if you have breast cancer, you want to know what all of those therapies are. You don't want just one, and you don't want a patient engagement platform that just tells you what one pharma company has. You want to know, what are all the therapies available? What are the approved therapies for my breast cancer, and what are currently in development? And so this platform, Rabble Health, will allow us to do that and become that third party intermediary, where we're not going to limit the sponsors that can be on the platform, because we believe that information should be disseminated from all the sponsors to these specific patients.
Very interesting. I've noticed also with Medicine X that one of the other motions, or through the journey of somebody coming into the system, is sending people to different Facebook groups, right? So these are
Yeah.
small, cloistered, secret or private groups, with a couple of hundred people in the different therapeutic spaces, consisting of other patients and other people managing the system. Tell us about what that process looks like. Who's moderating the Facebook group? What content is being generated, and how is the quote unquote sponsoring life science companies being allowed to interject and participate in these groups?
So the pharma companies are not allowed to interject or participate in those groups, and they are curated by our medical doctors. So as I mentioned, we have several medical doctors on staff, and so they are always curating those Facebook groups and ensuring that there's no misinformation that's put out there. And if misinformation is put out there, it's removed. So essentially, a comment will be deleted. So we have actually 2 coronavirus groups, and you can imagine the amount of misinformation that was being propagated. And so our medical doctors will remove that content, and also they are paying attention to AEs. And so we fall under the same type of guidance and qualifications as a pharma company. If there's any sort of adverse event or something that's related to a specific drug that's posted in the Facebook group, we have to report that within 24 hours. So, and we follow all of all that guidance. In addition, I think that where, pharma companies have historically struggled with this patient centricity and truly being patient centric is being able to overcome and realize that bringing people together in communities and creating kind of those support groups is part of what a patient needs, especially if they have a rare condition, especially if they have cancer. Really for any type of condition, we talk a lot about, I personally went through IVF, and IVF is a journey, right? You're a patient and you're going through a lot. And so being able to have other people to talk to that have been through that journey is extremely beneficial to the patient. So I think we have to continue to look at the opportunities to overcome what I would say historical barriers to creating and really supporting those patient-centric environments.
So what is the incentive for a life science company to sponsor, provide funding, either to Medicine X or Rabble Health if they're not participating? Do they get things like reports on social listening? Do they have access to cohorts blinded to patients in case they want to do studies or surveys? What is the business model there?
Yeah, so really there's two on the Medicine X side, but it is definitely around just creating general disease state awareness. And then also there is definitely the opportunity to gain insights from the group. So while the pharma company cannot directly interact with our patient communities, we do glean insights from our group. And so we will ask questions, and we do surveys. It is all blinded, so obviously none of that information is shared in terms of individuals with the pharma company. But there's definitely insights that can be very helpful. I know with one specific client, based on insights that they gleaned from our community, they did make changes to a specific protocol. And that can save a company upwards of $250,000 to $500,000 per protocol amendment. So there's pretty significant cost savings, related to that. In addition, Medicine X does have a model around patient recruitment, and that would be specific for clinical trials, where we do create pre-screeners, and we do use our digital marketing techniques to drive people to pre-screeners, and then obviously they go through the same qualification process that they would through the site for that specific trial. On the Rabble Health side, again, it's more that we have the channel than the content. So what I mean by that is pharma companies spend $4 billion a year right now on what's called kind of a spray and pray tactic in marketing. So they're just, blanketing the airwaves, whether it be the nightly news. You see these ads from pharma companies, but they're not targeted and they're not specific. So if you really believe in precision medicine, like Aubrey and I do, we believe that you need to have a specific channel that has an audience of people who actually are hungry for this information, actually want this information. And then it makes a lot more sense to use that channel and spend your dollars there than kind of just blanketing the airwaves and really not even reaching the market that you're trying to reach.
Right, phenomenal. And we have talked a lot about some of the challenges associated with discovery and identification. Obviously right now we're going through this pandemic and there's a race to developing the next best vaccine, and there's lots of players at the table. But certainly it's not just infectious diseases. There's multiple other things that are at the table. We can't forget that. We've obviously seen that we had a very rude, abrupt moratorium on trials. I think they came back up again, and I think there's going to be some concerns about maybe some lockdowns and how this may or may not affect clinical trials. So there's a huge onus now on virtual clinical trials and all of that. So how can the typical pharma company across the board in multiple therapeutic areas, and then specifically in oncology for Rabble Health, how can they leverage you, your companies, your platforms to be able to, I know you're saying that there's a recruitment process, but is there other openings and opportunities for clinical research organizations, for other agencies that might do this work on behalf of the pharma companies? What is their opportunity to work with your platforms?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, again, if you look at the clinical research side of things, again, I'll focus primarily on Medicine X from that perspective, but there's a number of opportunities because a lot of what is needed is education at the sites. So we've recently been working on a trial that actually is for the pediatric population for meningitis. And it's not, obviously we're not educating, the infants, but we're educating the parents at the sites. And so again, the sites don't necessarily come directly to us because typically it is through a sponsored study. And the opportunity there, though, is to create site materials that are that grab people's attention, right? It's a true differentiator. If you go into a site and you sit down and you have an iPad and you're able to, the site coordinator is walking you through the story, again, that creates a differentiator. The other opportunity in that space is around the ICF. So the informed consent form, historically, it has been, in clinical research, you get 60 pages or, something that people are typically not going to read or read all the way through. And if they do, they'll probably be confused because there's a lot of legalese, within that document. So again, there's an opportunity with the informed consent form to create that visual kind of storytelling aspect. And then on the Rabble Health side, we are not yet even working on patient recruitment. We are again focused on disseminating information. And again, we want anyone that has cancer, anyone that is recently diagnosed to have a clear pathway to understand the 700 approved therapies that are on the market and the 1,000 that are in development. So again, just that general awareness is really where we're starting, and then serving those cancer patients to the absolute best of our ability. So that's really the focus there.
Are you tracking what people are indulging in? For example, if a pharma company says, well, I'd love to post my clinical trial or trials on your site, and, here's a certain amount of money to do that, et cetera. Are you providing metrics associated with, here's your cohort or your universe based on the specific therapeutic area or disease or condition, and here's the number of people that recruited into a trial over X period of time? What sorts of return, success metrics do you share with the companies that provide funding or sponsorship to your platforms?
Yeah, on the medicine, again, the focus on Medicine X, we absolutely do that. So you see a funnel where you see everyone who clicks, the number of clicks to the pre-screener, and we show a funnel all the way through that says, and this is how many people completed. So we can see who completed the pre-screener. We can see who started it and maybe didn't complete it. So we have all of those numbers and all of those analytics that we are able to very quickly provide.
You've got one of those lights that I guess you have to. That's good. It saves the environment. I love the fact that you're saving energy and in reducing your carbon footprint. Exactly. So awesome.
Yeah.
That's great. So I do want to say is that, clinical trials, I mean, we're living in a different world.
Yeah.
Okay. It's this new normal. I mean, we talk about this all the time. I'm hearing like 2, 3, 4 years from now, even if it's going to look normal. So the world has changed forever since COVID-19.
Forever. Yeah.
And the impact on clinical trials, and I think we're only beginning to see the indentation on how this is going to affect the way we live, breathe, and do things in the pharmaceutical space. So what do you have to say, or what's your thoughts, and how are you potentially going to modify what you're doing either at Rabble Health or at Medicine X to be able to help conform and to build up these virtual clinical trials? And when we start talking about virtual trials, I'm talking, like you were saying, everything from e-consents to patient-reported outcomes, digital biomarkers. So there's these sensors and 24-hour glucose meters, and changing clinical trial protocols to be able to accommodate for real world evidence trials. So all of that in a bucket to say, what does this look like in the future, and how are your platforms going to evolve to help companies get there?
Yeah, I mean, and one of the most interesting things to me is that the technology to do all of this already exists. So it's not like the technology isn't there. It's an adoption issue, and it's providing leadership. It's overcoming cultural barriers. I mean, truly, so much of what we're dealing with in pharma is still related to this is how we've always done things. And so rather than saying this is how we've always done things, thinking about, okay, how can we overcome this barrier? How can we overcome this challenge? How can we solve, this problem? And just, I think, thinking creatively and being able to think outside of the box. I mean, for me, it's all the way from, again, I'll continue to talk about access to clinical research, and that the stigmatism that's historically been associated with it. It's been considered in some cases very negative. There has been negative press historically at times on clinical research. And at the same time, it's what moves us forward as a race, right? As humanity. And so helping people to be a little bit more educated about what clinical research truly is, and helping them understand the pros and cons, obviously the risk profile, and whether it makes sense for them, depending on what condition they're working with or trying to treat. But in addition, it's funny. Yesterday, I had a doctor's appointment, and I went online. I set up the appointment. I didn't talk to anybody. I set it up on the web. I logged in at the required time. I had a Zoom, telemedicine call with the physician. I mean, first someone came on, registered me, did my everything I needed, my insurance card, all of that. Then the physician came on. I mean, as you said, the world has changed forever, and expectations are going to change. And people that are participating in clinical research are going to expect it to be that easy, right? Like, I want to be able to click. I'm going to sign up and see if I qualify in terms of inclusion, exclusion criteria, right? If I think I qualify, I want to be able to sign up, and I want somebody to call me at my house. I don't want to have to drive to a site. And then we should be starting now, writing protocols that have a majority, not all, because sometimes site visits are necessary, but that there is the option to do, remote or telehealth visits. And by the way, that opens up a whole new world of people that can participate in clinical research that maybe historically haven't lived near a site, but they could participate if it's telemedicine, and if a doctor can be deployed, or a nurse practitioner or a nurse, generally speaking, to their home, or if they can receive a device. Again, with the advent of Amazon, and I mean, I can order just about anything and have it here tomorrow, right? So why not a medical device, right? Why not a blood pressure cuff that you hook up and, your data is there? So I believe that's the future of clinical research. But we have some hurdles as a collective that we need to overcome to really get there and recognize the opportunity.
I love that the conversation is starting. I mean, I follow somebody that I really respect. I'm sure you know who he is Craig Lipset. He talks a lot about the hybridization. So again, giving people the choice if it's on-site, off-site, all the things that you've actually just mentioned, I think is absolutely brilliant in getting into that uber specialization, or the N of one for each patient about what they need for their clinical study. And who knows, it'd be really interesting to start studying how much more quickly we can discover and identify new products based on the globalization potentially of conducting clinical trials.
Absolutely.
So very, very exciting area. I do want to find out from you, this is one thing about being able to potentially access a life-saving product. And again, realizing that when you go into a clinical trial that's randomized, you may be put on the placebo.
Right.
And again, we're looking at advantages potentially in the future of using artificial intelligence and using retrospective studies to do that control arm. So there's all kinds of discussion about that. But as it relates to this, is that you could be potentially be given one of these life-saving, expensive products through the clinical study, but this doesn't answer the never-ending question about what happens afterwards. How are we giving access to patients We just recently heard, not that long ago, that there was, three key CEOs from three large pharmaceutical companies that were, being assessed by the courts and asking about prices and all sorts of things. And this is kind of going on across the globe with antitrust regulations with tech. But we're now in a society that we're looking and trying to dissect all of these components about why we're trying to proceed and perfect what we're doing in healthcare, in tech, et cetera. So we need to have access for patients. Prices are expensive. What is Medicine X or Rabble Health? Is there some progression in the platform, in the thinking, to help patients in their journey being able to navigate reimbursement and access?
Well, I think first and foremost, if we can solve for, improving clinical research in the ways that we just talked about, and creating additional access, and potentially the idea of being able to move faster, right, as well. So if you think about it, you need to have enough time to assess the biological response. But we could do that faster, right? So, I mean, it's possible. I mean, you may still need 3 years, but maybe not 10. So, I mean, that's part of what I was looking at when I was the head of digital clinical trials at GSK, was how do we cut that time in half? And frankly, to be honest with you, I think that should be every single pharma's goal. Every single pharma right now should stop and go, how do we move from, a 7 to 10 year runway to a 3 to 5 year runway? What would have to be true for us to do that? And the reason I say that is because that's where 90% of the cost comes in, right? So there's always this, ongoing discussion and debate about how expensive medicines are. But when you work in R&D within a large pharma company, you know that it takes 7 to 10 years, right, to bring that drug to market. And truly, that is the cost that the company is trying to recoup. So I think the way that you start to solve that problem, again, at least this is just my opinion, is if we can cut that time in half, we should be able to cut the cost in half as well.
It's just brilliant. I really am very intrigued by this conversation and super excited about the opportunity. Now, I really like that logical thinking as well too, is what would need to happen. And sort of, if you temporarily suspend disbelief in all of our belief systems, what are some of these barriers that we've built internally with infrastructure, with compliance, legislation? What are some of these things that you sort of see as the top line that needs to be dismantled, reconfigured for us to get over to the other side?
Definitely. I mean, I smiled when you said, regulatory and compliance, because that's the number one, barrier that gets thrown up within pharma. However, I saw a huge shift within the FDA under Scott Gottlieb, talking about innovation and partnering. And so I want to see us doing more partnering and having discussions, because I believe that even from a regulatory and compliance perspective, the FDA wants these drugs to be safe. They want them to be safe, and they want them to be effective, right? You think about safety and efficacy. And so you sit at the table and you talk about, how do we make sure these medications are safe and effective, but also that they're accessible to patients who need them, and that brings in, financial, responsibility, that we have as well, to bring costs down. And I just fundamentally believe that the FDA wants to work with us. I don't believe or share the belief that that they want to put up barriers. I think that they want people to have access to these life-saving medications, and they just at the core want to make sure they're safe and effective. And there's a lot that we do, frankly, that has nothing to do with safety and efficacy, and it's just a ton of bureaucracy that's been layered, over the years. And I think it takes courage, going back to how you started our conversation today, to sit down and challenge, why are we doing this? Like, is it really contributing to the safety and efficacy of this medication? If it's not, then I really suggest that we start to strip it out.
I love it. And you know what is so absolutely true? It is literally some of these companies are behemoths. It's like trying to change the trajectory of the ship Titanic. It has nothing to do with anything. It just takes time to move the beast. And
Exactly.
that's really what we're talking about here, which is really interesting. But what you've also alluded is just, some of these new systems and divisions like the FDA, setting up things around digital therapies,
Yeah.
digital technology, digital therapeutics, software as a medical device. Exciting things are already happening. And I think also with the acceleration of reviews, global HTAs looking at drugs and COVID-19 vaccines, we're already starting to inject this system of change and accelerated movement and assessments. And these are hopefully the tides of change that we're going to see across the board in terms of getting away from the very lethargic, slow mode mechanism that we worked into something that be much more prioritized, focused, and accelerated. We would be remiss not to talk a few minutes about the effect of COVID-19 on mental health. And
Mm.
if you're seeing a surgence of companies coming through requesting things like everything from, digital apps for mental health, like things like Wobots and cognitive behavioral therapies. So it's not just chemical drugs, but also companies in this space around addictions, all sorts of things. What are you sort of seeing so far with what's approaching your companies?
Yeah, I mean, the one thing that I will say is that we built the Rabble Health platform with a mental health component. And that was really because with any complex medical diagnosis, so whether it's COVID-19 or whether it's cancer, uh, or whether it's some other rare condition that someone is battling with, we know that the mental health component of that goes hand in hand. So one of the things that we're trying to get people to do in the context of Rabble is just even tracking their mental health. And so if they click on, you kind of have happy, neutral, and then it's not been a great day. What we believe fundamentally is that if someone has, let's say 14 bad days in a row, their care team should see that and should intervene, right? And I think that the concept for COVID is the same. Somehow we need to use technology to bring humanity back. And bringing humanity back means that we're paying attention to each other. So we're not using technology to check out, but rather to check in. And so if you have your care team and your care circle and they see that you've clicked on, a sad face 14 days in a row, someone needs to intervene and say, hey, how are you doing? Because we know that can lead to it can lead to suicide. I mean, that's a very real thing. So I think that I hope that we will see more and more development in the mental health space, specifically as it relates to software as a medical device, because I think there's a lot that can be done with this phone that we all are carrying around that can be for good. And I'm really passionate about being a part of that story as well. I think the Center for Humane Technology is doing some really, really important work. And how do we turn a device that for some people has turned into a horrible addiction into something that works for the good of everyone? So I think we'll see more of that in the mental health space.
I love that you touched on that, and it's such a great way to close our discussion. We should talk sometime about potentially leveraging our platform for patient ad boards for some of your clients. That's what our platform does. So
Oh,
might be some
great.
interesting work there. But I love what you do. We're going to leave a link for those of you who are going to be listening to this afterwards or watching this afterwards to get in touch with Kimberly if you're interested in partnering with her, finding out what her organization does, either at Medicine X around storytelling, these private Facebook groups in specific therapeutic areas, or with Rabble Health if you're in the oncology or hematology space. So you'll be able to connect with her. And we encourage you to check us out as well too, impetusdigital.com. If you're interested in having some of these courageous conversations with your customers, payers, patients, allied healthcare providers, physicians, we do advisory boards, steering committees, investigator meetings. We do this all virtually and it's fully supported. Like this video, support us, subscribe so other people can find this content as well. We appreciate everybody's time. And always remember that everything that is positively disruptive in healthcare always starts with this courageous conversation. So thank you all. It has been an absolute pleasure, Kimberly, for your time,
Thank
and
you.
wishing everybody a wonderful day ahead.
All right. Thank you so much.